You're right. Nick says the wording in that last phrase in that song is different than what we're normally singing. We sing the way we normally do. Good evening, everybody. Kind of strolled in here kind of late here. My apologies. We stayed a little longer with the family and enjoyed a little bit of extra food with them. Just wanted to not run off after the time of the services and all. And just had a little extra time to encourage us. That was what Jeff was all about. And so just slipped in, but I'm glad to be here. Tonight I want to talk, I guess, about something that really changed the lives of apostles along the way. As you think about these 12 men, they were ordinary human beings. Obviously, they weren't just the run-of-the-mill type of people, I don't think, or Jesus wouldn't have picked them out. And yet, from their background, we know that Matthew, a tax collector, and four of the guys, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they were fishermen. And a lot of them just average run-of-the-mill type people. And there was something, though, yet inside them that I feel like Jesus felt like was in there, and that it was something he could do something with as far as apostleship is concerned. And I think a whole lot of that has to do with the conviction that each of these men had. I wasn't always on target, as you can read through sometimes, particularly about looking at the life of Peter, who not always was on target where Jesus should be and what he should do, but he was more of one of the most outspoken ones of the apostles. And so I just want to look at three different items about the idea of conviction, because it's so important for us as Christians, because the conviction we have, if we have the strong conviction that we ought to have as Christians, will stir other people, will make a difference in their life. Now that conviction will cost as we consider what it takes to have that kind of conviction, but it'll also count as far as what it can do and effectively do. So this conviction that we're looking at, I want to start in Acts chapter 4. We looked at this passage, or at least Acts chapter 4 this morning, and discussed the last several verses, but I want to look at what went on with the arrest and all of Peter and John back at the beginning of chapter 4. It's going along here in verse 1, I'll just read here. It says, "Now as they spoke in the temple," that's Peter and John, "the priest, the captain of the temple, and the Sadducees," notice how it says, "came upon them." It wasn't that they strolled up and said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And it almost sounds like they pounced on them. At least they surrounded them. They physically made such a strong representation as if, "You better come with us." And this is not just a small group of people. I know it's a short phrase, but when you consider this vast group of people, the priest and the captain of the temple who's in charge of a guard, the guard may or may not have been with him, it doesn't say particularly, and then the Sadducees, then they're bothered by what's going on, and so they do this. Now verse 2 tells us, it says they were greatly disturbed. Okay. If you're riding out in an automobile, and you're going down the street, and somebody sees you, and you do something, and they're greatly disturbed, that means they're liable to be agitated, not just in a small way. At the very best, sometimes we see certain kinds of sign language by people that drive by that are greatly disturbed. But we've even seen occasions where people have gotten out of the car and pulled out guns and started shooting, greatly disturbed. So this is not some little thing as we're looking at what's going on. It says they were greatly disturbed because they taught the people and preached in Jesus the resurrection from the dead. Now if you go back to the first verse, you notice that it was the Sadducees that were in this group. And that particular group of Jewish people were a very strict religious sect, but they didn't believe in the resurrection as the Pharisees had. So they're the leaders of all this. Verse 3 then says, "And they laid hands on them," that's Peter and John, "and they put them into custody until the next day, for it was already evening. However, many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of men came to be about 5,000. That nice number that we talked about even yet this morning, talking about the growth within the church. So as the church is starting to explode, we're seeing that Satan is trying to do something to stop it. And he always will. And in this process of time, these things, well, threatening, worked pretty good with Jesus. Kind of threw a kink in Peter's armor as far as him denying Jesus when Jesus was on trial. And so here he goes about again. Same guy, remember, and John along with him. And so here they are, and they've been performing some miracles just previous to that in chapter 3. They've been in the temple area preaching about Jesus, and now they're opposing friends of religious background of the Jewish people. They're tired of it. So they're losing people. 5,000 of them, matter of fact, just counting the men. So it came to pass, now verse 5 says, on the next day that the rulers, elders, and scribes, that's the rest of basically the Sanhedrin, as well as Ananias, the high priest, Caiaphas, John, and Alexander. And by the way, and these people are not known for their niceties. They're rather ruthless. Same people that put Jesus on trial and had enough political pull or whatever to do away with him. So they set them in the midst, verse 7 says. They're surrounded now by this vast Sanhedrin, probably about 70 men. 2 guys, 70 powerful figures. And they ask, by what power or what name have you done this? This is a crucial point for the church. Is Peter and John going to have conviction now? How are they going to measure up? They didn't do too well, at least Peter didn't, back just a short time before. Now he's out with miracles and stuff, and he's working in the temple, but some of these guys know about Peter. Perhaps maybe even a little bit about what he did got around to the Jewish people. So they're expecting much of the same. More austere group of people surrounding him, and they expect him to just back down. Verse 8 says that Peter was filled with the Holy Spirit. He said to them, rulers of the people and elders of Israel, so he treats them with respect, if we this day are judged by a good deed done to a helpless man, so they just healed a guy who'd been lame just previous to that in chapter 3. If we're being judged by a good deed done to this helpless man, by what means he has been made well, then let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you've crucified, and by whom God raised from the dead, there's the answer for the resurrection question. That this man stands before you today, healed or whole. I guess, as we'll read on here, that these people are a bit surprised at that kind of response. They're expecting fishermen to back away. Probably by this time, after having been with Jesus for 3 years, they don't smell like fish like they used to. But it was their trade, and that was obviously probably very well known even among the Sanhedrin. They didn't expect all of this response. And yet now, as these guys are standing, it's no longer them anymore. It's not about me. It's about what I stand for, my convictions that I have that makes a difference. And at this point, I'm not just a fisherman anymore, and I'm not backing down. I wonder how I've done in that situation. As they're wondering what's going on, and I've been standing there, like I'm doing right now with my hands in my pockets, and they ask me, how did you get this power? And who told you? You could kind of like look up a little bit with your eyebrow, like, Jesus. But that wasn't their response. But you're seeing the boldness, and I imagine it doesn't say shouting it out, but there's no doubt in their response. If you're asking us about how this is going, we'll tell you the name and the authority. And they do it boldly. And they demonstrate it, and they add to that the resurrection, which is in doubt, to establish the conviction of where their promise lies. Had they not, had they just whimpered a bit, Had they said, okay, I know this is causing a lot of hassle for you, and there's some resentment going on because now we have 5,000 men on our side and not on yours, and that's probably tough, and we're just going to let off a little bit. We'll be nice, but we're not going to. What kind of word would have gotten back to the church? What would the rest of that world that is kind of evaluating, do we follow or not follow, what are they going to think in this whole process? And so as we're looking at what's being examined here by the Holy Spirit, we'll see that the conviction is something that they have, and they're not going to turn loose. We'll read on just a little bit more. Verse 13, after they get through talking about verse 11 and 12, Jesus being the cornerstone, and there's salvation in no other, but they're really laying it out, and properly so. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and they perceived, I guess by the language, that they were uneducated and untrained men, they marveled. And they realized they'd been with Jesus. Took note. You can't do the same thing with these kind of people that have been with Jesus. It makes something different in their life. They're not just some ordinary fishermen anymore. They've been with Jesus. They stand for something, and they're not going to back away. Not from the conviction of the things that they know are true. You aren't going to change their mind. Well, verse 14, as we continue the thought here, it's in seeing the man who had been healed standing with them, they could say nothing against that. But they commanded them to go outside the council. Now they did that, and then they conferred among themselves, saying, what shall we do with these men? For indeed, that a notable miracle has been done. And it's evident to all. And we can't deny it. This is what I call the duh point, at least I will tonight. It's like, duh. Then think about what that means. If a miracle's been performed and you can't deny it, shouldn't you stop and think about what they're saying? But they don't. At least not at that point. So, verse 17, so that it spreads no further, they're talking to each other still among the people. Let us severely threaten them. They're worried about what? Their conviction. This has got them scared. Now vision what's happening. Because these 70 guys thought, well, we've got these guys over there. And they get them in there, and they can't. And the miracle's right there alongside of them, the guy that was healed. And they're trying to figure out what to do, and they don't know how to deal with this anymore. They're troubled. Well, they commanded in verse 19, but Peter and John answered and said, whether it's right in the sight of God to listen to you, more than to God, you judge. For we cannot, he says, but speak the things which we have seen and heard. Conviction again. Now, two things out of all this that's going to come along is, number one, it's going to cost them. Jesus has already warned them. In Luke chapter 9, starting at verse 21, Jesus talks about these people are going to follow after him. And if any man will come after me, he says, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. It's going to cost. It's going to cost dearly. It costs everyone. That conviction that they have cost the church. When we look at Acts chapter 8, just shortly after this, and more of the persecution has come on, Paul, matter of fact, has been involved in some of this, although he's known as Saul, at least at that point in chapter 7, is standing there while Stephen is being martyred at the end of chapter 7. He's described as the one holding the coats of the guys who did it, cheering them on, basically. Different type of stirring going on, but on the opposite side. Saul was convicted, I guess you could say, in a wrong way. Picking up at verse 8, or chapter 8, rather, verse 1. Now Saul was consenting to his death. At the time of the great persecution that rose against the church in Jerusalem, and they were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Apostles are still staying there. It's not that they're chicken, it's that they're not going anywhere. There's a church in Jerusalem, and they're going to go where they need to go, but right now they need to stay. Because there are still Christians that are there. Some are running around, taking off, and bless their souls, they're just trying to survive. Devout men, verse 2 says, carried Stephen to his burial, and they made great lamentation over him. First martyr in the church. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. But those people that went everywhere, verse 4, they went everywhere preaching the word. Their conviction still carried them on. It cost their life. It cost them to have to pack up and change everything about what they were doing. It could have cost them their home and their job and their land and so much more. Their freedom, you might say. Conviction costs. If that's the case, and it really was going to make the impact, and we'll talk about that next, then it sounds like it'd be worth it. That if it cost, it means it's got to be worth it to me. If that's what it takes, that's the price I ought to pay. As Jesus said, if you're going to come after me, you're going to have to deny yourself. And the challenge is, as well as for these men, can I do it? Well, verse 4, we pick up in the same chapter here. We look at the product of what goes on. So verse 4 then says, those that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the gospel. And Philip went down to the city of Samaria and preached Christ. And the multitudes, with one accord, heeded the things spoken by Philip, hearing and seeing the miracles which he did. Or, it just kind of describes one particular situation. Unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who were possessed, and many were paralyzed. And lame were healed. And there was great joy in that city. Not just for the healing now, but because the message has arrived. There's been a change that's gone on, and it cost them their lives. But just because they happen to pack up and move someplace else doesn't mean that there isn't something that they carry with them. That conviction now counts when they get to the next place. And changes are going on. Well, as we look at what we battle with in the places we live, go to school, the people we visit with, not meaning that we be unkind, but we need to carry our conviction with us about the gospel, about the value of the message, that we understand that there is a conviction that we ought to have for what it says. That conviction is going to stir others, and it's going to cost us, but it counts in the end. Conviction. When you look at what's going on, I guess, out of all that's happened here, that's basically what brought Jesus from heaven down to this earth to start with. What set him on the road to go to Calvary even throughout his whole process of life. He knew what he needed to do. It was going to cost him, but it would make a difference in the lives of these apostles and all these others that were around him. So much so that when it got down to it and they began to be questioned about what they're doing, they said, I'm sorry, but we can't help but talk about it. You can't stop me. I love getting around grandparents when they are first-time grandparents, you know, and the ages change. It used to be the grandmothers and all pulled their wallet out and they had these little things that just kind of folded down, you know, and had all kinds of pictures. Now we have them on their cell phones. And a lot of the grandmothers now being younger, these age coming up here, they pull out cell phones now and they're showing you all the different things. And it's like, but I didn't ask to see, but I'm happy for you. But let me show you some more here, They can't help but talk about this change in their life. And what about Christianity? If Jesus really has made a difference in our life, if there really is a hope out there that we talk about, if there's something worth living for and even dying for, then we should be able to not only say it anytime, but it'd be hard to stop us from talking about this Jesus. Conversations would naturally just always come back around to, let me tell you about what Jesus did in my life. And the hope that I have, and the difference that I have, and the church family I have, and all the things that are going on, because something's changed inside. So conviction stirs. It makes a difference. If I have it, it helps others to have it. It's going to cost, but it counts in the end in making an impact. Short lesson. Hopefully some good points to hold on to. Conviction in Jesus for what He's done. Think about it. If you need to respond to the gospel invitation tonight, just struggling with whatever, we sing a song to encourage you to go.